This meeting is being
This
recorded.
meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to another episode of the Less is More Sports podcast. We have a very special episode today because college football is back in full swing. And before even yesterday, Matt and I had an entire day worth of topics to talk about. So we're going to dive into it right away. And we're going to bring you to a game.
Wait. Aren't you forgetting something before we get into this?
No, we're not. We're not forgetting anything.
The birthday bag? Come on. I
Oh,
did
thank
that for
you.
you.
I appreciate that, Matt. I appreciate that.
Yes, anyone listening, it is Les's birthday and it's Labor Day. So he's in a double bonus situation right now. So let's see if we can give him a little bit something extra to run with.
I appreciate that. But the only thing I want for my birthday is to make a good podcast that the viewers enjoy listening to.
All right. I think we can maybe do that. Probably not, but we'll try.
We'll try. We will try our best. That's all that matters. It is the effort that counts, right?
Yeah, effort. E for effort.
E for effort. A for effort. F maybe, hopefully not F for execution. But anyways.
Okay, John McKay.
All right. Anyways, we're going to take you to the first game we're going to talk about. And I don't know if I'm reading this correct, Matt, but there were 62 points scored in the fourth quarter. 3 touchdowns were scored in the last 30 seconds. And we were a failed 2-point conversion away from Appalachian State, of all teams, having another monumental upset that rivaled the one over almost 15 years ago at the Big House. So, Matt, I saw you on Twitter tweeting about it, and your tweets were almost as entertaining as the game itself. So, what the heck did we just watch?
I really don't know, but it's the perfect encapsulation of why, even with a 12-team playoff, even with conference expansion going out the window and everything, the college football is still a really freaking good product. Because you have a game that's, like you said, almost good, scores 120 some odd points already. That ends on a failed 2-point conversion where a guy misses a wide open receiver and falls flat on his face because he thinks he can take it into the end zone. A game where there's 40 points scored by one team in a quarter after a questionable North Carolina defense actually looked like they could stop something for a while. It was everything that people do enjoy about college football, because I looked at my dad and I said this: you will never get a game like this in the NFL. Even with some of the offenses we have now, there's no way that the Buffalo Bills and Tampa Bay Buccaneers are ever going to score 60 points apiece on one another. So it was just an entertaining game out the wazoo. The new window looked to be the weakest one, but that game, combined with another game we're going to talk about, really showed why college football is the product it is, why it's so damn exciting when it's good. Yes, you're going to get a lot of Utah State, Alabamas, but when you get a game like this, where May is throwing out of his mind, Marcus May is throwing out of his mind. You've got a guy who, Mark May. Drake May. I'm thinking of Mark May because, I want to give out a helmet sticker here. But you got Drake May throwing out of his mind, a guy who's been to 2 different schools, including one of your favorite schools, a fifth-year senior leading a team to 61 points, which would be enough to win most games. It was just a really fun, exciting game that showed why college football is one of the best products you can get when it comes to watching an athletic event. And we can talk about how we should be worried about North Carolina's defense. We should talk about how Appalachian State is now a force in the Atlantic Sun Conference, but that was just one of those games where you don't even want to analyze it. You just want to take it in because you're seeing something that can only happen in a sport like college football.
So my big takeaways, I'm going to make them short and sweet so that way because we got a lot of games to talk about. My first one is, why in the hell couldn't Chase Bryce have a 6-touchdown game at Duke? Maybe he'd still be starting. But then again, we wouldn't have this legend that is Riley Leonard, which we will get into later. My second narrative, though, is one that I'm all too familiar with because, as you know, that I have 2 college teams, Duke and Texas. One of the coaches on that sidelines for that game used to coach at Texas, and that's Mack Brown. And if you remember, every time Mack Brown goes to a program, there's all this excitement that goes into it. Recruits start coming in. There's a swagger about his regime. But then that swagger, after a while, slowly starts to fade. And then he slowly starts losing his touch. I saw it at Texas. The Vince Young teams were great. The Colt McCoy teams were really good. And Maybe if he doesn't get injured, maybe he wins another national title. But then he slowly loses his touch. He did it in his first stint with North Carolina. And now, because he's getting older, it's getting harder to relate to some of these younger recruits. It's happening even quicker now at North Carolina. Yes, Drake May is a very good quarterback, and he can really sling it. But you got to have guys on both sides of the ball that can make plays. And right now, their defense just doesn't have it. So it leads me to believe that but Coach Brown is getting to that point where he's starting to fade out like he does at everywhere else he's been or every other coaching stint he's had. So that was my big takeaway from the game. So would you like to add anything else before we move on to the next game?
No, we just need to play the Your Old song from SpongeBob for him.
How many times we got to teach you this lesson, old man?
I love Vince Young. Vince Young isn't here, Mac. What do you mean? Oh. All right.
Vince Young is making 6 figures at Texas right now.
He's having a good time. And moving on.
Moving on to the next game,
North Carolina.
featuring a team that you and I were both very high on. And
yeah.
So anyways, the North Carolina State Wolfpack narrowly escaped a game against East Carolina, and a game in which the extra point was missed. So Matt, you look a little worried about your North Carolina prediction.
My North Carolina prediction.
North Carolina State prediction, sorry.
Who was talking me into that? Who was right there with me last week, sir?
Okay, you're right. Yeah, I may or may not have talked
to Leary too. Or Devin Leary, man. I wish Dennis Leary probably could have as good a game as Devin Leary did. Devin Leary looked like the 4th best quarterback in his own state in that game. But instead of focusing on the negative, I'm going to focus on the positive, which is that NC State defense is as good as we thought it could be. And from what I've seen out of a lot of ACC teams this week, that's going to make a world of difference because those offenses, they look about as electric as – I'm trying to think of something that has no electricity. Electric as a wet rock. How about that?
They're Onyx.
Yes.
They're Onyx from Pokemon.
They are basically that. And Devin Leary had a terrible game, I'm not going to lie. But NC State found a running game. Number 0, whose name is escaping me right now, looked incredible, flexing on him. And you've just got to praise East Carolina for the job they did with their own quarterback, dropping dimes left and right, that they were that close to pulling it off. And let's also remember, too, these are college kids. Anybody who sends ill will towards a kicker in a college football game is just get a life, dude. Get a life.
Yeah, get a life.
I'm saying they're kids when they're probably like a year younger than me, but you know what I mean.
No, absolutely.
But I mean, if anything, I feel like this is going to be good for NC State going forward because now you've got a guy in Leary who's going to want to prove that he is as good as we think he is. The defense balled out when they had to and kept that game from getting out of hand and kept the East Carolina from scoring. So, I mean, it's I'm not as negative as I should be about this, but I'd be lying if I wasn't sweating, crying, screaming, and throwing up during the game.
So I may or may not have, been a bad influence on Matt with his North Carolina State take. But that being said, yes, everything Matt said is correct. That defense is everything we thought it was. And what's even more impressive is that one of their star linebackers, Peyton Wilson, actually got injured during the game, and he didn't even play. So it's a testament to the depth that they have on that side of the ball, something that they were lacking last year. But yes, I mean, the biggest takeaway for me is how good Holton Ahlers is for East Carolina, because as you all saw me tweeting during the game, I mean, I don't know if Dilfer's Dimes is still a segment on Sundays anymore, but can we get an entire segment of some of the passes he threw? Bro,
I would love
NC State could not have played any better defense than some of the plays that they had, but he's still fitting them in tight windows left and right. There's no defense for a perfect pass, and that's exactly what he was throwing. But as to what you said, NC State's defense made plays when they had to, which is the testament of every great defense. It's not always how many stops you make, it's when you make these stops. But as for Devin Leary, we're talking about a guy who is one of 6 quarterbacks over the last 20 years who has had 35 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. Obviously, he has a lot of expectations coming this year, especially within the ACC conference. we might have seen a little bit of overconfidence or, maybe thinking that he's able just to walk through the park or whatever. But like you said, I think this is a very humbling experience. Hopefully he takes us positively, because with that defense, man, this Wolfpack team could be special, because that running back that also they have, number 0, that dude's a beast.
I mean, they really could. I mean, if you've got defense and a run game, you can have a quarterback with a few bad games who can be really good when you need him to be, and be fairly, if not 9-3, successful.
With the ACC this year, 93 could very easily win the conference. Let's not get ourselves.
Let's not laugh.
Not at all. But okay, I think we covered everything we got to say about NC State and East Carolina. So let's move on to a blowout between two ranked teams, and that is Georgia and Oregon. I think, Matt, before I let you have the floor real quick, I think you and I are both thinking the same thing. That going into the game, we expected that any team that loses 15 NFL draft picks would take even the slightest step back. No, not at all. Not at all.
No. It didn't even look like Oregon was in the same level. They look like an NAIA school out there against Georgia. And they've got a quarterback with XCC experience in Bo Nix, and he just looked like he was Sam Darnold. He was seeing ghosts of Georgia past out there. He was thinking Champ Bailey's running out there or something. I mean, that was just a dominant performance. Stetson Bennett looked like freaking Tom Brady out there throwing the football against a guy who should know how to defend against him pretty well, considering their new coach is the former Georgia defensive coordinator. But they just looked like they were two different worlds. It wasn't funny. I know it was number 3 versus number 11. It was more like number 3 versus, I don't know, the school from the Water Boy, only without Bobby Boucher playing. It was awful. I mean, I didn't even
3 versus maybe 111, team number 111.
Yeah. And now it's like, was I stupid for not putting the defending national champion back in the playoff? They may not win the SEC, but my God, if they can do that and just absolutely pluck that duck the way they did, oof, Georgia is going to be one hell of an out this year. And like you said, they've got no problem replacing 15 guys with 15 other guys who look even better at times. So, yeah, I really don't have any thoughts about this game because there's no thought to have. It was just a massacre.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we're all rushing to think that, maybe Georgia's even better than they were last year. And, only time will tell. There's still a whole season left to be played. But if we remember correctly, in an earlier episode, I said that Kirby Smart was starting a dynasty in the making in Georgia. And I didn't expect them to repeat as champions this year. But, after week 1, they're looking as good as, they look like they have as good a chance as anybody in college football right now. Now, obviously, take it with a grain of salt. First game of the season, a lot of football left to be played. But like you said, Bo Nix played at Auburn in the SEC. He's seen that defense before. Not only that, he was an Elite 11 camp contestant, which, do you know how good of a quarterback you have to be just to make that camp? So,
yeah,
and he was
pretty damn good.
Yeah. Bo Nix is a very talented quarterback. He's often struggled at putting it all together at times. But everything Matt said, they look like they did not deserve to be in the same building. They look like they pushed all those ducks out of their home pond. It was bad. Or like Matt said, they plucked these ducks.
They did not have their ducks in a row.
They did not have their ducks in a row, not at all. And I also made this statement, and I stand by this. Georgia has the best tight end room in NCAA history. Obviously, you have a team. Brock Bowers is a monster. Darnell Washington, the highlight that everyone's talking about, a 6'7", 270 guy hurdling someone. Oof. Gosh, that's scary. Not to mention, get this, Matt. The third stringer was the former number 1 ranked tight end recruit who started at LSU, Eric Gilbert. And he's the third stringer. That is insane. And like you and I have talked about on this podcast many times, the tight end position has become such a revolutionary position in football right now. And to have as good a room, the best tight end room in the history of college football is a weapon all in itself.
Yeah, that's like greatest show on turf potential at the college level.
And not to mention everything you said about Stetson Bennett, who does not get the credit he deserves as a quarterback at all.
But people tell me, like, he's the next Greg McElroy, he's the next Mac Jones. And I say, I see more potential there than that. He's got more of an arm than I recall those two guys having. And although he's got the same kind of talent, his decision making is just he's just a little bit better than those two guys. I think if you give him another year or two, he could be a top 10 pick depending on how the rest of the quarterback classes shake out.
I believe this is his last year of eligibility, so he'd have to,
Oh,
but regardless, I still think he has a brighter future in the NFL than some
oh
might
yeah.
believe. I
Yeah.
mean, because 90% of what makes a quarterback is decision making and going through your progression, and he does that extremely well.
Yeah, he's like a robot, but a
Mhm.
good robot.
Yeah, good.
A
Yeah, he's
Terminator.
one that like has artificial intelligence. Let's go with
Yes.
that.
Something like that. Yeah.
That's another one of those
Me-
quotable less is more sports podcast moments.
Meanwhile,
Anyways,
elsewhere in the SEC,
elsewhere in the SEC, we're going to talk about a game that actually was a lot more intriguing than I actually thought it could have been, and we're talking about Arkansas and Cincinnati. Which, Matt, I got to ask you, Cincinnati lost a lot of players in the NFL draft. How do you think they fared against Arkansas overall?
I'm going to be honest, Les. When we were doing those previews a couple weeks ago, I almost put Arkansas as my sleeper team. But when I saw that they were ranked pretty highly, I kind of reversed course on that and went with Kentucky. But I really appreciate it. It's hard not to appreciate what Sam Pittman has done for a program that was dead in the water 2 years ago and how good they look. But I mean, Cincinnati to me was the inverse of what Georgia is. And it shows the difference between the levels in programs to me because you could tell that they were missing a Desmond Ritter, that they were missing a Sauce Gardner, that they were missing a lot of the guys who made that team a college football playoff team last year because unlike Georgia, there aren't 7,000 players lining up. They don't have a third string tight end who was the number one recruit in the country. They've got who they've got. And even more so to hurt Cincinnati before the game, they lost their offensive lineman, which is a big deal in the SEC where they play defense like crazy. And so I'm not at all going to bury Cincinnati in the least here. They did the best they could, and they only lost by 7 at Arkansas to a team who I expect to defy some expectations this year with an extremely tough schedule. And the thing about that game too, Les, is to me, it just felt like a war of attrition, and Cincinnati just couldn't get that extra oomph to come back and tie the game at the end when they could have to make it 24 all. I mean, it just felt like you were watching a team who had lost a guy who they would have had, who would have tied this game in Desmond Ritter, and you're just watching and waiting, and they just can't do it because they're still trying to figure something out. And I mean, you've got to give credit to Arkansas; they did win, but if you extend that game maybe another 5 minutes, maybe Cincinnati does tie it. But towards the end there, it just felt like Cincinnati was up against a wall and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do from now on in this situation. And once they figure that out, they're going to be fine. They're going to make a bowl game and they're probably going to be playing Houston in that American Athletic Conference championship before they head off to the Big 12. And if they can hang with Arkansas with a depleted roster, I'm not worried at all about them playing in an actual big boy league where they're going to be playing Oklahoma State. I think that a game like this proves the value in making that pick if you're the Big 12 conference.
I agree 100% because that was my big takeaway is how much Cincinnati impressed me with how many players they lost in the NFL draft and that they're not like you said, they're not in a position like Georgia. They don't have guys just lining it. They don't have NFL talent just backing up NFL talent.
Yeah.
The way that they were able to hang with a very good Arkansas team is very impressive. And of course, if not for a very good performance from Arkansas quarterback KJ Jefferson, this is a much different game. KJ Jefferson often goes overlooked with other quarterbacks in the SEC, but he's a very good player, very fun to watch. But I think that pretty much wraps up everything we need to say about Arkansas and Cincinnati. And let's go to one of the other primetime matchups, switching conferences, going to Notre Dame and Ohio State, which was the long-awaited debut or official debut of Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman. So, Matt, what do you think of What did you think of? I know Ohio State got the win, but overall, what did you think of Marcus Freeman's debut as a coach?
I mean, it went extremely well. I mean, I think of all the coaches who had their coaching debut this weekend, even the ones that won, he had the most impressive to me because he was a 17.5 point underdog on the road against an offense that we've already slammed the champagne bottle against and christened one of the best to ever play college football. And he still held them to 21 points. And they only got to 21 points in the fourth quarter. It was not the blowout everyone, including myself, thought it would be. Notre Dame came in with a conservative and detail oriented game plan to try and slow Ohio State down. And they did. And they did. Now, I'm not going to lie. They did get a huge boost when Smith and Jigba went down. You hate to see that. You want the best players on the field at all times, especially a guy that good. But Notre Dame came in with a game plan. They executed to the best of their abilities, and they eventually just ran out of juice offensively because of, and we're going to flip it around here, the Ohio State defense. And that's my other big takeaway from this is that Ohio State, I think, is actually better than I thought they'd be. Now, unless you may look at me like I'm crazy here, but you did mention this a couple weeks ago, which is that they've got a new defensive coordinator, they've got a new defensive scheme on life, and it showed because everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong for Ohio State in that game. They let Notre Dame jump up to an early lead. Their offense looked anemic. The horseshoe was not a rockin', and they lose their number one target to an injury very early on in the game. Now, this has been last year's Ohio State defense. Notre Dame probably could have put them away. But this year, with a new defensive coordinator, a new defensive scheme, they looked like they were the Great Wall of Ohio. They were very hard to score on. They made plays when they had to. And here's the thing, Les, if you've got a great defense like that and a good quarterback like CJ Stroud, the offense is going to happen. It may take a while to work on that chemistry. You may have some jitters shaking it out in your first game against a top 5 team, but you're going to figure it out. And having that defense playing like they did in their pocket makes Ohio State even scarier to me because they're just that much more balanced now. If the offense is having a bad game, the defense is going to be really good, and
Yeah.
vice versa. So this was one of those games where it's like, yes, there was a definitive winner and loser. But in spite of what Paul Feinbaum says about Notre Dame being a joke, they proved they weren't a joke. They proved that they've justified having a top 5 ranking, which they'll probably lose because of the weird coaches pool stuff. And Marcus Freeman had a great debut. You can tell these guys want to win for him. And you can tell that Ohio State is even better defensively than we think they are, which is going to pay off greatly come December.
Ohio State was my preseason national champ for a reason because you add that offense with a Jim Knowles defense, that's scary, and they showed it in week 1. I understand Notre Dame has a first year starting quarterback, but the schemes were there, and he really didn't have a lot of room to operate because of the game plan that Jim Knowles had for that defense. And I credit that more on him than anything that Notre Dame's offense didn't do. That being said, I think I agree 1,000% with you. This tells me more of a sign of things to come for Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. For them to be able to lead into the third quarter against a team that I think is going to win the national championship, they're able to hold the best offense there, who we think is the best offense in college football, to 21 points. And like you said, didn't even score that 21st point until the fourth quarter. That is a great sign that he's able to still have an impact on that defense, because he isn't the full-time defensive coordinator anymore, but he still has a way of getting through to his players that this is what we need to do to execute. If you can slow down that offense, I don't see a team on Notre Dame's schedule that they're not going to be able to slow down. So that being said, what was it? Taylor Buckner. I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name, but that new quarterback, he's going to settle in. He'll be fine. If they can get stops against those other teams, Notre Dame's going to be fine. They're going to be good, and this is a sign to things to come. Not to mention they have a really good recruiting class coming in the next year. Notre Dame's on the up. So without further ado, Notre Dame, go Irish, go Marcus Freeman. But let's get into one of the more games that happened yesterday, and that was a wild finish. All right, so LSU, Florida State. Matt, go and take the floor. You got it, bud.
Oh, it's glorious. Way back at the start of the summer, Les.
Brian Kelly lost his Southern accent.
Yeah, he lost it real quick when he got his ass kicked. How's that? it's like what you and I were talking about at the beginning of the summer. Marcus Freeman, that's a great move. Brett Venables, he's got a good situation going. The one that we were just completely flabbergasted by, why the hell is Brian Kelly going to the SEC? Unless he didn't even make it in the club door before he took an L. How's that? That's beautiful. I mean, LSU's off all this week. He's playing mind games like, oh, we're not going to name our quarterback until the day of the game as a competitive advantage.
Even though we all
I
know it's
think
Jaden Daniels, we all knew it was going to be Jaden Daniels anyway.
we all knew that was going to be it, and you're playing with that kid's confidence. And then, less you have Kayshawn Boot, the heir to the great LSU wide receiving empire.
He wants out.
He wants out after game one. He's deleted you off his post. He's looking into the transfer portal. Some sources from like the Times Picayune, like B team, are saying he already has. Man, woof. I don't know if you can script a worse debut for a head coach, especially in the SEC, as you could for Brian Kelly. It doesn't even feel like they almost tied the game. It feels like an L after an L after an L after an L. And on the flip side, is Florida State back? Maybe. Maybe Mike Norvell just finally found the winning formula. He's got a really good quarterback. But Les, I don't care about that right now. Because there's one other thing I learned over the weekend, and that's that I never hated Notre Dame. I hated Brian Kelly. And watching Brian Kelly get served an etouffee of ass whipping is beautiful. So that's my takeaway from it. That might have been the worst coaching debut in the history of coaching debuts. And I am here to lick Brian Kelly's salty tears.
Oh, buddy. Matt woke up and chose violence to Brian Kelly, and I love it. So, anyways, LSU looked exactly what they are, a bunch of new guys playing for a new team for a new coach. Because if you go back, we're not just going to talk about the blocked extra point. Look at all the mistakes they made on special teams. Look at the very first drive. They're marching down the field. All of a sudden, center hikes it over Jaden Daniels' head. Lose yards. All of a sudden, got to settle for a field goal. Drive killer right there. They made mistake after mistake after mistake. They did not even – Florida State did not even win this game as much as LSU lost this game. So Matt is licking up Brian Kelly's salty tears. And I know the ones on Spotify can't see like the little mouth gesture you just did, but no, for me, it's disappointing because I thought LSU would be a sleeper team, even though Matt and I both agreed that this wasn't a great fit. I looked at the players that they brought in through the transfer portal, Jaden Daniels, Noah Cain, etc. And I thought, you know what, they can maybe make some magic happen. But this goes to show that there are usually two ways how you handle a new situation. You either pick it up right away or you have some growing pains. And let me tell you, they have a lot of growing pains. They have They have those Anthony Davis, I grow a foot over the summer growing pains.
But I just have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
If LSU is who we thought they were, then who are the Bears?
Let them off the hook. But anyways, so that wraps up some of the marquee games that we're going to cover. So, Matt, who is your impressive under-the-radar individual performance as we approach 10 minutes to go?
You know what, Les? I'm going to go with a guy who we all know and love. And on that same show, we talked about this team a little bit when it came to new coaching, and that's Michael Penix Jr. Transfers into Washington, 4 touchdowns, 345 yards. The first game of the Kellen DeBoer era, which you and I were very high on, is off to a hot start in Washington. And I'm very excited for this young man. And all the Indiana fans commenting, when's he going to get hurt? Get a life. Let the kid play. He got a big win against Kent State. Big confidence booster. He had time to throw. I think that Michael Penix Jr. is primed to have a really good year out in Washington. So that's my outstanding under the radar performance of week 1.
I know this is the part of the segment where all the fans are thinking that I'm going to come in, talk about how improved Texas's defense is, how Quinn Ewers looked, and how bad that Austin Towing Company looks for towing Quinn Ewers during the game. But no, I am here to shock the world and tell you that I am impressed with the Duke Blue Devils in their first game in the Mike Elko era. Look, I get it. Temple is not a world beater. But hell, neither is Duke football. We just got shaded on by Colin Cowherd a couple weeks ago during one of his hot Daniel Jones takes or whatever it was, which I don't know why he waited 4 years to say, oh, he looks like a quarterback that plays at Duke. Really? You didn't know that when he got drafted? But okay. Anyways, but no, speaking of going from one Duke quarterback to the current Duke quarterback, Riley Leonard looked amazing. He completed his first 15 passes on his way to a very good game debut, and probably the best debut for any quarterback in Duke history, if we're being honest. But what stood out to me the most is that when we hired Mike Elko, he was the defensive coordinator on a very good defensive team with Texas A&M the year before. What impressed me is that you don't see very many shutouts for Duke football. But what's even more impressive is that Temple did not cross the 50-yard line until the third quarter. So that tells me there's a sign of things to come in Durham. And there was a tweet from one of the Duke bloggers back when Elko first got hired that there's something brewing in Durham, and I believed it. You know, obviously I'm the Duke fan. I want to hop on that train. But if this is a sign of things to come, I'm very, very pleased. I don't care if it's Temple or not. This is Duke football we're talking about. They usually don't give me a lot to be excited. But anyways, that being said, Matt, who is your disappointing performance?
Les, you know me. We live in an area with hotly contested sports rivalries, and I like to stay away from those, but I'd be lying if I said that my disappointing team of the week didn't have to be Louisville. You're going into Syracuse. This is a very winnable game. You have an explosive quarterback in Malik Cunningham, a very good offensive line, and a pretty darn senior laden good defense, and you just got your butt kicked. You got your butt handed to you. Scott Satterfield got, I don't even know how to describe, coached in circles by Dino Vavers in Syracuse, 31-7. Malik Cunningham with 152 yards passing and 2 picks. That is not how you want to start a season that was already pretty contentious to start the year. A lot of U of L fans wanted him gone and were holding on to dear life that a good offensive line and a great quarterback could get it through, and none of that showed. If anything, those were the weakest parts of the Louisville offense, the parts you expected to be really good. And to lose to Syracuse, a team who's in the same situation as you, by that much shows that there's a disconnect there, and they need to figure it out really quickly because now they're playing with a razor thin margin for a bowl game. Because I went on and looked, they have 6 games, which don't seem very winnable to me, and they've already got 1 loss to a team they should have beaten. So my disappointing team of the week goes to Louisville for just an all around poor performance against Syracuse because, oof, I have no idea what was happening there as I was watching it, but it was not good in Louisville.
Since you picked Louisville, we already talked about my disappointing performance of the week, and that has to go to Devin Leary because of the expectations we have for the NC State Wolfpack, the expectations he has coming into the season. And he just was an absolute no-show week 1. So he was my disappointing week 1 performance. So let's go into a more positive note. And I know exactly who this was directed towards when we put this on the script. We have to talk about the coaching debut of Billy Napier at Florida, upsetting the number 17, who a lot of people had Utah sneaking into the college football playoff. But Billy Napier, in his first game in the Swamp, gets his first win as the Florida head coach against the number 7 team in the country. And Matt, let me ask you this. Not even tell me. Let me ask you this. How good does Anthony Richardson look?
Very.
Oh my gosh.
Good. Man looks like the truth, if I'm being honest with you. That run to tie the game in the second quarter, oh my God. I am firmly on the Anthony Richardson bandwagon now. And I cannot wait because there is no slowdown in this college football season because next week we get Will Levis versus Anthony Richardson in the SEC East in, I think, the Swamp. Oh, lordy, that's going to be one hell of a game for week 2 at 7 o'clock. That's going to be a very good game. I cannot wait for that because, man, Anthony Richardson looks really good. Utah just looked like they had never been in an environment like the Swamp before. The Swamp was rocking. Just goes to show that sometimes the biggest move you can make is the one that most people think is pretty minor. But yeah, kudos to Billy Napier. Kudos to Anthony Richardson. If only Georgia wasn't in the SEC East.
I know.
That way I could say I really hope that they go to the championship game, but I cannot say that in good faith. Anthony Richardson, however, looks like the truth. Billy Napier is the truth. And it makes drinking those salty tears even better.
You know what's funny is I remember, as I just mentioned, that a lot of people had Utah as a sleeper pick to sneak into the college football playoff. But one thing that I specifically said on this podcast in our college football preview was that they look really good against non-high-powered offenses or against non-high-powered playmakers. You get a playmaker like Anthony Richardson, and they did not know what to do with that. Of course, when you got a playmaker like that, there's not much you can do, especially when he's juking people for 50 yards down the field. But
that's one of those you can only hope to contain things right there.
Mm-hmm. And I always remember when there was a quarterback battle between Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson at Florida. And I remember how high a lot of the Florida faithful were on Emory Jones. But I was always one to say, no, Richardson's the guy. Richardson's the guy. Well,
he is. He proved it.
He proved it. He's that guy. But anyways, that wraps up most of the topics that we have for today. I do want to say, though, one of my, I think I'm going to add an overall winner and loser by position wise. I'm going to say that the winners for college football has to be the tight ends. There was a lot of good tight end play on this weekend, and one of the big losers was special teams. A lot of bad special teams play.
Like punting it into your blocker's butt.
Yes.
Way to go, Arizona. Way to go.
Let's give them a round of applause.
Les, I know what the answer to this is going to be, but as our parting question, what are you looking forward to in week 2 of the college football season?
I'm looking forward to hoping that my prediction is correct, that Texas keeps it under 17 points to Alabama. Look, I am very excited about the Sarkisian era. I think we're off to a great start. I think we have a very bright future ahead of us, but we are just not close to Bama right now. But I do think that we're going to surprise a lot of people. I think people are expecting this to be a much bigger blowout than 17 points, and I think we give the Tide a much more competitive game. So as we enter a minute to go, I have to say that's all the time we have for the Less is More Sports podcast episode today. Be sure to like and subscribe to Less is More Sports YouTube, Spotify, and Anchor channels. Be sure to like and to comment in the comment section below what you like. Tell us what you liked. Tell us what you didn't like. Be sure to follow the social media pages at Less is More Sports on Facebook and Twitter. Also give my man Matt a follow. And Matt, is there anything you want to end on?
Yeah, 2 things real quick. Number 1, Louisiana. Just because I hate Brian Kelly doesn't mean I don't love you. You're a great state. You have great food and great people.
Great food.
And number 2, if I had one wish, it would be to be able to stay up and watch the Baylor BYU game next week. But I know that's not happening. So we'll see you next week where I watch highlights of that game.
See you next week.